She was sold for 2 rifles, a jug of corn whiskey and 3 horses. The men who bartered her away didn't care to ask her name. They called her the girl, and when the Lakota took her, they didn't ask either. She had no say, just ropes around her wrists and eyes too dry to cry. The wagon trail blurred behind her. Dust and summer heat clung to her dress like shame. She was 18 and had never been kissed, but that didn't matter anymore. Her father said she was barren, no use to any white man, so he traded her. They arrived at dusk, when the plains turned gold and the wind moaned like an old widow. The Lakota camp was quiet, not savage like the stories she'd been told. No war cries, no violence. Only silence, smoke, and eyes that watched without speaking. A woman came forward first. Her braids were silver, her hands leathered by time. She touched the girl's face and nodded once. Then the ropes were cut. No one touched her again. That night she sat by the fire, not speaking. The Lakota didn't force her to serve or kneel. They gave her food, warm deer meat, a soft skin to sit on. Still, she curled inward like a hurt animal, flinching at every shadow. She didn't sleep, but in the firelight she saw him. A man not like the rest. Broad shoulders, long hair tied back with leather, a deep scar across his left brow. He didn't speak to her, didn't even look long. But he watched, not with hunger, not with anger, with something she didn't recognize, something like waiting. The wind whispered through the camp. Somewhere, a child laughed softly, but inside her, everything was still burning. She thought of her father's words, spat like tobacco. She's good for nothing. Take her. And for the first time that night, she wondered if death might have been kinder. Her name was Clara, though no one had spoken it in weeks, not even herself. She had stopped using it the day her father spat on the ground beside her and walked away without looking back. After that, she was just the girl again, a body to be moved, not a soul to be kept. The Lakota did not call her anything. They pointed when they needed her to follow, left food near her, gave her a place to sleep near the older women and the children. No cage, no chains, but no words either. In silence, she became invisible. During the day, she sat beneath the cottonwood tree near the creek, watching the water slip over rocks. It was the only thing that didn't judge her, that didn't ask her to be something she wasn't. She would touch the current sometimes, feel its cold kiss on her fingers, and wonder if it could take memory with it. The children would sometimes approach, not too close. One girl, no older than 7, had a doll made of buffalo hide. She offered it once, but Clara only shook her head, the gesture so small it almost disappeared into the wind. The women wove baskets. They gathered herbs. They watched her from the corner of their eyes, not unkindly, but with caution, as if waiting to see if she'd break apart or simply fade into dust, and she might have, truly. There were mornings her breath felt like a burden, her limbs stiff with dread. She didn't know what the Lakota meant to do with her. If they expected obedience, work, something worse, but none of that came. Only time. It was the man with the scar who kept appearing quietly, like a shadow in her periphery. He never approached, but he always seemed nearby, sharpening a blade, tending to a horse, watching the sky. His name, she learned by accident, was Matto, Bear. One evening, she watched him braid the mane of his stallion with practiced hands. The animal leaned into him, trusting. Clara felt a strange ache watching them, as if longing were not dead inside her after all. That night a storm moved in. The wind howled across the plains like it had lost something. Thunder cracked the sky, and lightning painted everything in ghostlight. The teepee she had been given shuddered, the fire inside dying. She curled into herself, knees tight to her chest, remembering cold nights back home, how her mother used to hum when storms rolled in. But her mother had died slow and quiet, the sickness eating her bones. After that, there had only been her father and the bottle. Clara flinched at each crack of thunder. She bit her lip until it bled, willing herself to be still. Then a hand gently pushed aside the flap of her tent. Matto stood there, his face unreadable in the flickering dark. He held out a thick buffalo robe and a small clay cup. She hesitated, then took both. The robe smelled of sage and fire. The drink was bitter, herbs and root, but warm. He didn't speak. He just sat a few feet away, eyes on the storm beyond. And something shifted, not much. A sliver, a space inside her, long locked, stirred, not safety, not yet, but something quieter, a kind of seeing. She looked at him then, really looked. At the scar, the way he sat like the earth beneath him was part of him. She wondered what he had lost, because only someone who had truly lost could see someone like her and not look away. The storm passed by morning, but the silence between them no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like a language waiting to be spoken. Matto did not speak to her with words, not in the beginning, but he spoke. He carried his language in the way he moved, steady, deliberate, like a man who knew silence better than most. When he walked past her in the early morning, his eyes met hers just briefly, as if asking a question without pressing for an answer. Clara had learned to fear eyes. Back home they had either judged or desired, but Matto's gaze held neither. It simply saw her. Not the shame she was told she carried, not the use others had tried to place on her body. Just her. He began leaving small things near her fire, a piece of smoked meat wrapped in bark, a carved bone comb, dried berries. Never with fanfare. Always before she woke or when she wasn't looking. One day, she found a painted stone resting on the edge of her bedding. A river rock smoothed by time, painted with a single red dot and 4 black lines. Later, she would learn it meant healing journey. But in that moment, she simply held it to her chest, like something fragile and sacred. She started watching him from a distance. He moved like someone who had once run wild and had since learned to walk with care. With the horses, he was tender. With the younger warriors, firm but fair. He laughed rarely, but when he did it was deep, a sound that startled her heart like the first bloom in spring. Clara didn't know his story, but she felt it on him. In the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he thought no one was looking. In the long moments he spent staring toward the western hills at dusk, there was weight on him. Not the kind that bent the back, but the kind that lived in the ribs, heavy and silent. One morning, she followed him. He was heading toward the ridgeline where the hills rose soft and red. She stayed far enough back not to be noticed, or so she thought. But when he reached the top, he turned, and their eyes locked across the distance. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just waited. She climbed. By the time she reached him, her breath was thin, her dress caught with burrs, her boots scratched. She stood beside him, unsure, heart wild in her chest. He pointed, slow and open-palmed, toward the valley below. There, stretched out like an old song, was a herd of wild horses grazing under the morning sun. No fences, no marks. Freedom, he seemed to say. She didn't speak, just stood there, her hand slowly inching out until her fingers brushed his. He didn't pull away. In that brief touch she felt something steady, like soil after a long drought, like a body that could hold the weight of another's grief and not collapse. When they walked back, side by side, their hands didn't touch again. But the space between them felt full now, not with fear or confusion, but with breath, with the slow, impossible hope that maybe she had not been traded away to die. Maybe she had been brought here to live. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who had been waiting for something she couldn't name. Autumn crept in without warning. The days grew shorter, the wind cooler, the fire more necessary. Clara began to move through the village like someone waking slowly from a long sleep. Still quiet, still unsure, but moving. She had started helping the women. At first they watched her, curious but restrained. Then one handed her a basket of corn to shuck. Another showed her how to dry sage and sweetgrass in bundles. A third taught her how to mend leather with sinew, her fingers clumsy but learning. It was in these small tasks, these shared silences, that something began to settle in her. Not comfort, not yet, but the soft shape of belonging. Matto did not speak much even now, but he was present. When her hands blistered peeling roots, he placed salver near her fire. When she forgot to eat, too lost in thought, a bowl of stew appeared beside her, still warm. When she shivered at night, another robe found its way into her arms. She never saw him do these things, but she knew. In return, she began to watch for him, If he came back late from hunting, she left food for him by the fire. If his shirt was torn, she stitched it with a care that made her breath hitch. Once she found a loose feather and tied it with sinew near his horse's bridle. He never said anything, but he noticed. One morning, a boy fell into the river. The camp cried out, and people rushed, but Matto was there first. He dove in, pulled the child from the current like he weighed nothing. Clara watched from the bank, frozen, until the boy coughed up water and wept into Matto's chest. Later, she brought a blanket to the lodge where they had taken the child. She didn't knock, just left it near the entrance. When she turned, Matto stood a few feet away. Wet, tired, still catching his breath. He nodded. It was the first thing he ever gave her that wasn't left in silence. From then on, they began sharing the same space. Not always together, not always close, but always aware. Clara would sit near the fire, combing her hair with the bone comb he had once left her, while Matto worked on his bow or carved small wooden birds. Their lives touched in the rhythm of the everyday. She learned that he had once been a warrior, but had stopped riding with the others after a battle in which his younger brother had died. He never spoke of it. But one night when the stars burned bright, she found him sitting on the ridge, staring up as if trying to speak to someone long gone. She sat beside him and said nothing. He reached out and placed a stone in her hand like the first one, but with a new symbol. This one meant carry both, pain and peace, memory and now. He still didn't ask her about her past. He didn't need to. Some nights she cried quietly, back turned, eyes clenched shut. And in the morning, there would be a flower by her bed or a handful of wild plums. One day, while helping gather water, a girl from the village whispered, "He watches you like you are already his wife." Clara didn't answer, but her hands shook and she spilled a little water from the bucket. Because the truth was, she no longer felt like something broken. She felt like soil in spring, dark, rich, full of what might come. And in Matto's silence, she had begun to hear a song, not loud, not with words, but with roots. And it was growing. The snow began to touch the edges of the world when the men arrived. 3 of them, mounted on grey horses, with cold eyes and coats worn by eastern wind. They were not hunters, not traders. They were white men, dirty, armed, and they brought no peace. The camp dogs sensed it first. They barked, growled, circled. But the men were not intimidated. One of them dismounted as if he were on his own land. Hat pulled low, gaze direct. Clara recognized him immediately. Reed Walsh. A frontier man, her father's partner. He was the one who had suggested the trade. She had heard him one night drunk, saying that the Indians would pay well for a white girl. Now he was there, looking at her as if nothing had changed. "I came to take back what was loaned," he said, spitting tobacco into the snow. The village fell silent. The women gathered the children. The men stood slowly, like those who already knew peace had ended. "She's not yours," Matto replied, voice low, firm. "Not now, not ever." Reed smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "That ain't your decision, Red Man." He pulled a crumpled paper from his saddle, a document with a sheriff's stamp. It said Clara was a fugitive, that she had been sold with consent, that she was being sought for property restitution. Property. The word made Clara shudder. She didn't scream, didn't run. She simply stepped back, the bead necklace hitting her chest like a weak drum. Matto stood between her and the men. "She's under my protection," he said. "You'll not take her." Reed laughed louder this time. "Protection? There ain't a law out here that protects stolen goods." And then, without warning, he drew his revolver. But Matto was already moving. Not with fury, with precision. He didn't draw a weapon, didn't shout. He just advanced like silent thunder, shoulders firm, his whole body speaking what his mouth didn't need to. The first man fell with a sharp blow, the snow stained with blood. The second hesitated and was disarmed in a quick movement. His arm twisted, the weapon thrown into the fire. But it was Reed who fired. The sound cut through the air like a knife. Clara screamed. She didn't know there was sound inside her until that moment. She thought her voice had died with the past. But there, seeing Matto stagger, blood staining his hunting tunic, something broke. She ran to him, knelt, pressing the wound with her bare hands. "Mato, please stay with me." He looked at her, eyes glistening, not with pain, but with something deeper, as if he saw in that moment everything he never had time to say. Then, before fainting, he whispered, "You are not stolen, you are found." The Lakota warriors surrounded the invaders. Reed was restrained, bound with leather strips, but Clara saw nothing more. She only saw Mato there in her arms, the warm blood flowing and the fear not of being taken, but of losing him, the man who didn't take her, the man who chose her. Mato survived, but for 3 days he didn't wake. Clara didn't leave his side. She refused to sleep, to eat, to even go out for the ritual bath the women offered. She remained there, sitting beside his body, changing the cloths, murmuring songs her mother used to hum when she was small, songs without words, just sounds, just soul. The medicine man came twice a day. He applied herbs, blew smoke over the wound, spoke ancient words to Mato's spirit, asking him to return. The women came in silence. Some left roots, others touched Clara's shoulder and departed. No one said she should leave. She was already one of them. On the morning of the 4th day, when the snow fell fine like bone dust, Clara took Mato's hand, soaked with fatigue and hope, and said, "If you go, I go." The words came out low, raw, and then he opened his eyes, slow, cloudy, but alive. She cried without sound. Tears fell on his hand, which squeezed hers, still weak. He was the one who spoke first, voice scratched, almost without strength. "I dreamed. You were fire." She pressed her forehead to his, smiling through sobs. "Then burn with me." In the following days he recovered slowly. With each breath of wind, each spoon of broth she helped him drink, life found its place inside him again. Not as before, but stronger because now there were roots. The tribal council met. They wanted to know what would be done with the white men. Reed was still imprisoned. The others had been expelled. Clara was called before the circle. For the first time she spoke. "I was not stolen, I was sold, but only because I was abandoned first." The silence was thick. Then she looked at the elders, at the women, at the boys with attentive eyes. "Mato did not buy me. He waited for me." One of the elder women stood up. "Then let it be known she is not one of us by pity, she is by fire." In Lakota tradition, this meant rebirth, a spirit proven by pain, but not defeated. At sunset that same day, Clara and Mato sat side by side before the village fire. The ceremony was brief, sacred, made of smoke and gesture. There were no shouted promises, no golden alliances. Just 2 pieces of braided leather placed on both their wrists, the connection between 2 stories that met without haste. The children sang, the women danced, the men beat drums, and Mato, looking at Clara, said only, "Wife." She didn't answer. She just rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, listening to the sounds of the earth and of the heart, like someone who finally found the right song after a lifetime of silence. The tribe saw her, but more than that, she saw herself. And for the first time she didn't want to go back. Winter came completely. The plains became white vastness, and the rivers slept under ice. The trees, bare, cracked at the slightest touch of wind. But inside the village, the fire never ceased. Neither did the warmth between 2 bodies who had been strangers to the land, to time, to themselves, and now were home to each other. Clara spent her days helping prepare hides, dry roots, care for the children. The elders now called her the one who returned from death with wolf eyes, not for ferocity, but for loyalty, for having watched over Mato's spirit like a wolf that doesn't abandon the pack. Mato gradually returned to riding. His step was slower, his shoulder still ached on cold days, but his gaze was clearer, not like before the pain, but like someone who learned to walk with it without letting it command the steps. One morning, Clara found him looking east, the sky tinged with gold, the clouds thin as veils. She stopped beside him, silence stretching between them like an old blanket. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He understood the whole question, even though she hadn't said everything. Life before, his brother, the days when he was just war and duty. He was silent, then answered, "I miss what I thought I had to be." She nodded, understanding. She too. That night, there was a small celebration. Not for a date, but for survival. The women cooked sweet roots. The men told stories. The children made snow dolls and placed them in a circle like a small council of spirits. Matto carved an eagle in wood for her. Clara, in return, gave him a piece of the dress she wore when she arrived, now sewn between leather strips and feathers, not as a symbol of pain, but as a reminder of how much one can be reborn from what was torn. That night, while everyone slept, Clara wrote something in the snow with her finger. "Since that day, I've never been anyone's property again." Then, the wind erased the words, but inside her, they were engraved. At the end of the season, Clara looked at the sky and thought of everything she had lost and what she had gained. The world was still difficult, dangers didn't cease, but there, between the sound of drums and the smell of burning wood, she was no longer the girl who was sold. She was woman. She was root. She was choice. And if someone asked one day how she survived, she would smile and say, "Someone waited for me, so I stayed." Would you have stayed too, even after being cast aside? Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you. And if you believe in second chances, subscribe to Silent Ranch.